In this video, we're going to talk about raster versus vector. So, if you can remember me saying vector quite a bit when we were working in Illustrator, Photoshop is actually a raster-based program. And what raster is basically an accumulation of pixels. So if we were to, say, take a brush here, okay, and we were to make it a little bit bigger, like so, and let me see, okay, good, everything else looks good, and I just kind of put in a circle there, like so, you can see that this is just a circle of pixels. So this is completely rasterized because it is held down by little tiny pixels to create this entire circle. So, and that also is dependent upon the resolution that you're working in. So if we zoom in, for instance, if we zoom in all the way, you can see all these little tiny boxes here are pixels. They're basically a full box of color, a single color. And when you have multiple colors or a lot of colors, they start to come together as one and create essentially a image, right? So you can see that this is completely filled in by raster. This is a complete raster image here. And if we were actually to put in an image, so let's say that we find an image, let's say take this pear here, and we open it up into a pear. You can see this pear, it looks like a pear. It's a photograph of a pear. It has the leaf, the stem, and then the fruit part of it. But if we actually dive in a little bit deeper, let's go about right here, you can see that it now looks like a bunch of pixels. You can see the little tiny squares. Each square has an individual color in it, and there's enough color in there that when you zoom out of it, it looks exactly what it is intended to look like. But again, you zoom in and you can see all the little tiny pixels there that associate with the picture, and they kind of come together to create that picture and create the detail. And obviously, the more pixels that you have, the more detail that you're going to have, and the less pixelated it's going to be. Okay? So that's what raster is. Now, Photoshop is predominantly a raster-based program. So you're going to be dealing mostly with pixels. And there's a lot of advantage to that as well, because you can deal with a lot more detail. You can deal with creating sort of a painting. You can do a lot of paintings. You can do a lot of rendering. You can do a lot of softening and combination of colors and gradients and a lot of different things that you can't normally do in Illustrator. Now let's take a look at an Illustrator or type of vector in Photoshop, and so that we can kind of look at that. So I'm going to create a circle exactly like I did with the brush, but I'm going to use the shape tool instead to create this shape, like so. And you can see here that this here is now a shape using the shape vector tools. The elliptical tool right here, similar to what you can do in Illustrator. However, this is different because this is actually held by a path. And the path is right here. Okay? Now, if we look inside of it, let's say that we zoom inside. Now, whoa, what is that? Those are pixels. Now you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, if these are pixels, how is this a vector? Well, the thing is that in Photoshop, vectors in Photoshop are also rasterized. But the only difference is that these are held up by a path, okay? So since this is a path here, this will always be the same no matter what. Just like with vectors. Vectors will never lose their quality because they're held up by math. Math is what kind of constructs everything with paths. Whereas this will always lose quality because it is based around pixels. The computer can't really figure out how many pixels that you have. So when you have those in there, it's going to always be kind of pixelated. It's always going to look kind of pixelated. Okay. So in this though, in vector will never lose its quality. It will always be the same. It's almost like the perfect material to use in design because it just never loses its quality. Okay, so raster here with pixels, and then this is vector here. So just know that when you're dealing with Photoshop, you're dealing with pixels, and even if you are dealing with paths in Illustrator as well, or in Photoshop as well. Okay, so let's talk about rasterizations real fast. So we have an image here, right? We have an image here, and you can see that when we look at this image, it is filled with pixels. So all those little tiny blocks are little pixels. So if we go to the edge, we can see there's pixels right here, okay? Now this file type is actually a 300 resolution, which means that there are 300 pixels per every inch that is in this document, okay? So I'm going to actually reduce the document down, like so. Reduce this document down a little bit, like that. Just so we have the round object in our document, like so, and we're only dealing with this round document here, this round circle. So we have this circle, which is completely rasterized. Everything is raster, which means that if you look through all these pixels, you can see the different types of pixels that are creating this shade. Okay, we used a gradient for this. Okay, now when we look at this image here, you can see that as a 300 resolution, it looks really nice. It's nice and crisp. It's nice and round. There's not a lot of pixelation. It looks like it's kind of blending in really nice, that sort of thing. So let's actually drop this down a little bit so you can kind of see what I mean when it comes to rasterization and when it comes to resolution. So when we go to image, we can go to image, and then we can go to image size. And when I go to image size, what happens is I have this little document that pops up, and it tells me the size of the image. So right now, the size of the image is basically a 5 by 5 with a 300 resolution here. Now, the 300 resolution is pretty much how many pixels per inch, right? So right now, we're using 300 resolution. So what if we drop that down to, say, 100? So if we drop it down to 100, let's see what happens. And push OK. Let it render. Okay. It gets a little bit smaller here because it's actually slightly smaller, even though the dimensions are the same. So it looks still pretty good, right? But we can still start to see on the edges here that it's a little blurry. It's starting to get a little blurry here, which means that there's less pixels in this image. So you can see all those little pixels right there? Okay. So there's less pixels there, which means that the image is actually getting a little more pixelated. Okay. Now let's go a little bit smaller. Okay, let's go a little bit smaller now. Image size, let's change the resolution to, say, 50. Actually, no, let's change it to 72. 72 is sort of the go-to resolution when it comes to most images for the web. And then the dimension size obviously will change based on however big the picture is. So we're going to push OK. Okay. As you can see, it's slightly blurry. It's not too bad. Okay. All right, let's drop that down to 50 now. Let's go to image, image size. Let's drop it down to 50. Okay. Zoom in a little bit. And as you can see, the pixels are starting to really show up. Okay. Now let's get really extreme with this. Let's change this to 25. Oh, now you can see that these pixels are really standing out. You're losing a lot of resolution, so we have to actually zoom out a little bit to not see the grid that's there. So if we zoom out, you can really see the pixels. See how rough that is? All these pixels that are there that create this pixelization. Now let's really take it down. Let's get a little more extreme. Let's do 5. So basically right now is that there's only going to be 5 pixels for every inch of this document. There's only 5 by 5 inches here. And look at that. That looks really pixelated. I can't even go any further unless you start seeing all the pixels there. See? So it's really, really, really pixelated at this point. It's so pixelated to the point where you can't really tell what's going on if it was a much more detailed image. And now let's take it to even more of an extreme. Let's do a 1 pixel, 1 resolution, 1 pixel per every inch. And as you can see, it's almost nothing. So let's go back to 5. Okay. All right. So I moved it back to, I Control-Z'd it back to 5, a 5 resolution, because sticking at a 1 resolution won't do anything for this next example. So now here's the thing. Here's the thing about resolution, why it's important, why you should always start with a higher resolution. The thing about it is that if you start with a low resolution, it's harder to bring back pixels. So when you're dealing with changing sizes and resolution in Photoshop, you're having to deal with a little bit of how the computer works. So the computer's looking at this and saying, well, we can't really do anything to this. I can only do so much because I don't know exactly what you want me to do. And actually, it's gotten a lot better over the years. But let's see what happens when we bring this back up to 300 resolution. So I'm going to do 300 resolution, like so. I'm going to push OK. And yes, it's white because it's gotten bigger. We zoom out. There it is. Whoa. This doesn't look exactly right, as you can probably tell. So you're probably asking yourself, what happened? Why did it not look like the original 300 resolution? Well, the problem with this is that the computer is being forced to make its own decision. Okay, now computers at this particular point don't have the intelligence that we have. So what we're looking for is not exactly how the computer will look. And the computer, what it does is it says, okay, you have to make this 300 resolution, which means that we got to add more pixels, which means that I got to add more pixels to try and make this look more like it originally did. However, the problem with that is that it doesn't know where to put those pixels. So it thinks about it for a second and says, okay, this is kind of close to that. So let's put in these pixels like so and deal with it later, right? So it doesn't really know exactly where to put the pixels. And so it just kind of adds them where they need to be, kind of imitates the color, and tries to fix it the best way that they can. Now, this is not correct. This doesn't look good. As you can see, it's very blurry in a lot of different areas. It's very blurry everywhere, and even an image will look blurry, okay? So you don't really want to deal in this sort of particular area. You don't want to expand something and makes it look weird. Now, there are ways to go about that when we talk about smart objects, but for the most part, it looks very odd, very weird, and yeah. So not very good. Doesn't look very good. So let's do a Control-Z. Let's go back all the way until we get our regular 300. I think this is 300 now. Yep, 300 resolution. And you can see this 300 resolution here now. That looks a lot better. It's a lot cleaner. This is what it originally looked like. And so it just tells you not to reduce the resolution or start at a low resolution so that you can bring that back up to a higher resolution.